Hi everyone, Stepan here. In this video we are going to continue the Trompowsky series with black's second move c5, which leads to some of the most aggressive Trompowsky positions if white wishes to enter them, one of which is the infamous Vaganian Gambit, which we are going to have a look at as well. So previously we've covered different moves, different approaches by black. The best move, knight e4, pawn to e6. These are the two options that prevent white's threat of taking on f6 and doubling the pawn's threat. And if you haven't seen the introductory video to the Trompowsky, please do, because I've explained the basics in that one. We also had a look at d6 and g6, which are sidelines that transpose into one another, also allowing bishop takes f6, but not giving black similar fighting chances to what we are going to have a look at today. So basically with the move bishop g5, white wants to undermine the control of e4 and gain a structural edge. So if black does nothing, white can take the knight, double black's pawns, and then have an easy time playing e4, where since black has doubled f pawns, he can play f5 to prevent e4, and there are a lot of ideas from here on. With the move c5, black does two things, two very aggressive things, and since the Trompowsky is an attempt to complicate matters, to go into positions which are unclear, which are not like normal chess positions, and basically white players who play the Trompowsky like aggressive unclear positions, then c5 is a good response, because c5 breaks white's center straight away. It's really hard to keep this center alive. Basically either c3 or e3 are very bad moves, which give black a free hand and just waste a move. So white doesn't have time for that. So either the center is going to collapse, or the center is going to have to overextend, meaning white is going to have to push d5, which will lead to a pawn structure with black having pawns on c6, c5 and d6 ultimately, which is always double-edged, and both sides have chances. Black has Benoni and Benko style queenside attacks, white has e4, e5, breaks in the center, etc. The other thing that the move c5 does, along with breaking the center, is it gives the black queen a very interesting option to come out to this square b6. And as we are going to see in the Vaganian Gambit, which is also known as the poisoned pawn variation, which apparently exists in the Sicilian and in the French and in the Trompowsky as well. So black is given the option to put pressure on the b2, which has become weak since the bishop vacated the c1 square. So one downside of the Trompowsky, similar to what happens in the London system or the Torre attack, is once the bishop moves away from c1, b2 is weak, and the move c5 highlights that. Now white is not losing, of course. He can solve both problems, and there are two ways to do that. We're going to have a look at four moves. Bishop takes f6 is the most popular move, the most principled move, going for a slight positional edge with a better structure, more space, and trying to exchange pieces win the endgame. And that's not always the case, but basically if you exchange pieces you will be better. That's one approach. We are going to have a look at that in detail. The other approach is to play very aggressively with d5 or knight c3. These moves can transpose, but I don't have to transpose. d5 will lead to crazy positions of the Vaganian Gambit, which is basically unavoidable. Knight c3 is going to either lead to the Vaganian Gambit or to positions where white castles queenside very quickly and starts an attack. So those are the two aggressive options. And one option that I would quickly discard is d takes c5, which is just a bad move. And d takes c5 allows black to more than equalize, and white has just given up his center for nothing and doesn't have anything. Okay, so let's go through d takes c5 first, because this is the only bad move of the four options. Basically, there are no other good moves. You can play e3, but that's just queen b6, and that's not good. Also c3. Okay, so let's start with d takes c5. Why is this move so bad? I should just say before we continue, bishop takes f6 is the most popular, d5 is the second most popular, knight c3 is the third most popular, and bishop takes f6 and d5 are sort of close. Bishop takes f6 1200 games, d5 900 games. Okay, d takes c5. Why is this move bad? Well, this move is bad because white has now given up all of his central control, and it's not a pawn he's going to keep. This pawn is going to drop. The question is, why is this bishop on g5? This bishop isn't doing much on g5 in this position. And black should not play queen a5 check and regain the pawn immediately, because after queen d2, trading queens is best. You can do this and play knight a6, and this pawn is going to drop, but there's a better way to play. You can simply play e6, and there is no way to defend this pawn. White should continue with knight f3, and black is going to take and be better because he castles first, he has an extra central pawn. Basically, black has everything in this position. If white tries to defend this pawn, then this you should know from the Catalan, from the semi-Slav. We've covered a lot of openings where white tries to defend his extra pawn, or black more often on the queen side tries to defend his extra pawn. This can easily be undermined with a5. Now, of course, if you take on a5, I take on c5. If you advance with b5, I take on c5. If you defend with a3, I take, and your rook is pinned, your pawn is pinned to the rook. If you try c3, then ab4, cb4, and knight c6, and this pawn is dropping again. And this is a pattern you should know. Again, from the black side, it doesn't have anything to do with the Trompowsky. I'm just showing you bad moves. So if b5, for example, then you can still take bishop takes c5, and if bc6, knight e4 is a winning move. And basically, if you try covering with the bishop, I mate you on f2. If you don't cover with the bishop, I'm going to win all of your pieces. So yeah, black is minus a million here. So basically, after e6, this pawn is not going to be defended. White should continue developing, black should take the pawn, and after something like e3 castles, knight bd2, for example, or knight c3 and d5, black is just slightly better, and white is never going to have an advantage in this position. So d takes c5, don't play d takes c5. Now, let's go over d5 and then knight c3. We will get to the main line in the end. The reason why I want to show you d5 first is because knight c3 on move 3 can transpose into d5 if black wishes to do so. Okay, d5. Now, I should just mention that black has the option to transpose into the main line with 2 knight e4. So if he plays knight e4 here, we have now transposed into the main line, which we can reach this way. So d4, knight f6, bishop g5, knight e4, bishop f4, c5, d5. This is very common. I've covered that in a video on 2 knight e4, so you can watch that. So with d5, if black wishes to avoid the Vaganian Gambit, then he can play knight e4. But black should not avoid the Vaganian Gambit. I mean, it's aggressive. White will have a lot of pressure on the black position, but you get a pawn. So let's see what happens. Queen b6. So using the fact that this pawn has vacated the diagonal and the queen can come out to b6. And white's only good move is knight c3 to give up a pawn. I'm going to show you why. Before we look at the lines after knight c3, queen takes pawn, let's figure out why knight c3 is the only good move. Let's say bishop to c1, defending the pawn, for example. Now e6, if you take, you're helping me develop, and your center is gone, so you don't take, you defend the pawn with c4. And now queen b4 check takes the pawn anyway. After knight c3, queen takes pawn. If instead of that you exchange, then black has even more. Look at the activity, look at the development, and this is just too passive. Bishop c1 is very passive. Alternatively, you can take the knight first, but in this position black doesn't have to ruin his pawn structure. This is very similar to some Benoni lines after, or Benoni lines, c5 lines after knight f3, where the queen comes out early to f6 and black fianchettos his bishop afterwards. So this is a common maneuver. Queen takes f6, and after c3 defending b2, just e6, and black is equal or slightly better. And this is ridiculous. this pawn is just, this is no center, this is just a weakness. So bishop takes f6 doesn't really work with the queen on f6. That means that you've moved your bishop out to g5 and given up your bishop pair for nothing, and also wasted the tempo. Okay, what else? If b3, then knight e4 is a crushing move. Black is completely winning here. Why? Because the queen is going to be coming out to this diagonal. If the bishop moves, this is going to, for example, if bishop f4, queen f6, and yeah, okay, the queen attacks the rook and the bishop. So after knight e4, I don't know what to suggest. Probably queen c1. I think the engine likes queen c1. But now h6 and bishop e3 and g5, and now this is winning for black. Okay, so b3 doesn't work either. Well, what else can we do? I mean, if you don't have the option to defend the pawn, again, queen c1 is too passive. Knight e4 again. And so knight c3, the Vaganian Gambit. And this is not bad for white. Don't get me wrong, this is not bad, this is good. And all you do is gambit a pawn, but you get a ton of activity. So queen takes b2, and you play bishop to d2. This bishop now retreats, it wasn't doing much. Defends the knight, fine. The queen drops back to b6. It has to start moving back, otherwise rook b1 and stuff is going to be very strong. e4. Okay, normal. Now there are a couple of options here. You can play e5 with black, you can play d6. E5 positions are quite different and give white a protected passed pawn very early on. Let me show you what happens. So with e5 here, we play f4, which you don't want to take. So we play d6, and now after, eventually fe5. So for example, rook b1 I think is the main move, and queen d8 and takes. White has more than enough for a pawn here. Even though this is the second most popular option for black, it's very risky. So let's have a look at the main move. After e4, black plays d6, and this is safer. You don't have to play e5 if you don't want to. You can play e6, which is, I think, a better approach. Regardless of whether black plays d6 or e5, white continues with f4 and just tries to blow open the position. And basically, after gambiting this pawn, white is given something in exchange, and that's central play. And eventually, white wants to get two pawns on d5 and d5. And the fact that he doesn't have the b2 pawn actually helps get his rook into play. So I would say the Vaganian Gambit is more than enough for white. Now in this position, there's a huge branching of the position. There's a blitz game between Carlsen and Short, played in 2004, which Short won convincingly. Short played g6 here, so you can have a look at that. If you are a patron of mine, you can find the game in the study PGN on the feed, so all the games are in here. Also, there's a line with queen d8, which Ivanchuk lost to Andreikin in 2017. So there are a couple of options. Basically, black is going to go for a Benoni setup eventually, bringing his queen back because rook b1 is happening. So the queen either drops to c7 or to d8. And g6, bishop g7 is the only place for the bishop. Even if you do play e6 eventually, you prefer your bishop on this diagonal immediately. Now, it's possible not to play e6, and you can sort of play an old Benoni setup and play g6, bishop g7, but e6 is considered to be the main line. Basically, black is in trouble because he needs to sort these out immediately, and white doesn't have to do anything but play knight f3 and e5 and start an attack. So it's much easier for white to play. Also, I should mention it's possible to play e5 here and again go for these positions, which at least you're not allowing e5. So this is a very crude way to prevent white's plans. And I should say, if you manage to get a knight into d6, then that's very good, but it's very hard to get a knight into d6. You would have to play bishop e7, castles, knight e8, knight d6. That takes time. Okay, but the main idea is e6, undermining the center straight away. Rook b1, white chases the queen away. The queen could go to c7, which is less popular. Queen d8 is more popular. I think queen d8, well, if I'm following a Benoni logic, queen d8 gives the knight the option to go a6, c7 and help with the queenside push. So at least a bit more options. Also the queen is in some cases able to come out to h4, which cannot be bad. Okay, white continues bishop b5, developing with tempo, bishop to d7, and now d takes e6. This bishop is pinned. Of course, we've seen this pattern before. Fe6 is forced, and now e5. And here there are maybe 10 or 20 games left, but this is basically the position you have to start studying. There are many options from here on. Basically, we are out of theory, so white now has to play on his own. But what you can see is, for example, if this knight is not traded off straight away, if I'm black, I'm taking on c3. If this knight is not traded off straight away, then maybe it takes, and maybe this knight is coming into e4 eventually. Of course, when e5 is defended. But you can see that after knight f3 castles, the f file is open, the rook is on f1, the black king is in trouble. That being said, black is still a pawn up. So maybe there's something there. This is a possible line in which white is able to get the pawn back and give black equality and calm the position down. So for example, knight takes, bishop takes b5, queen e6, so white gets his pawn back, queen e7, queen c8 for example, queen d8 takes, king takes, and rook takes. And this should be, of course, perfectly equal. So that's one example. But the game could go many different ways. So let's go over that again. After c5, if white plays d5, black is given the option to transpose into the main line with 2 knight e4, or he can play for the Vaganian Gambit, which white cannot avoid. Knight c3 is the only good move. Queen takes b2, bishop d2 defends the knight, the queen drops back to b6, and now e4. Now black has a couple of options after d6, f4. He can play for e6, he can play for the eventual e5, he can play for g6, he can play for queen d8. I'll show you g6, what Nigel Short played against Magnus Carlsen. Knight f3 was played here, bishop to g7, rook to b1, queen d8, and here Magnus just went badly wrong with e5. This is just too premature because the center is collapsing and his king is still unsafe. So he played e5, d5, bishop b5 check, knight f to d7, knight f to d7, f takes e5, and a6 was played, and basically the pin was broken. Takes, and queen e2. And white did not have enough. This is the ideal setup you want to have, but white's position was just too loose and he didn't get enough of an attack. This is how the game went. Queen e2, castles, a4, queen c7, bishop f4. Here, and black eventually went on to win. So the Vaganian Gambit, the games from the Vaganian Gambit, you should definitely study them. It's hard to learn it just looking at the theory, because the theory runs out at some point. It's very interesting. Okay, let's look at an alternative to d5. Let's look at knight to c3. So with knight to c3, white is prepared for two things. The first one is black can play queen b6, and white has nothing better but to play d5, and this is the position we just had a look at. This is the Vaganian Gambit, queen takes b2, bishop d2 with transpose. However, after knight c3, black doesn't have to play for the Vaganian Gambit. Black has a couple of options. Black can play queen a5, which I don't think is a very good move because of bishop f6, and after gf6 simply e3, white has a nice structural edge, for example cd4, ed4. I think white is always slightly better here. Also, black could play d5, leading to positions very similar to d5 on move 2, which we are going to look at in the next video. So for example, bishop takes f6, again g takes f6, e3, white shouldn't have any issues here. Or black can play the most challenging move, going for a sort of Sicilian structural advantage of a extra central pawn with cd4, queen d4, where black gets the ideal tempo on the queen on d4 with knight c6. However, here's the idea. Even though black has very good development, great central control, and once these pawns start moving forward, it's going to be hard to play. White has a great attacking position. Queen h4 is the move, and after e6, unpinning here, or pinning but defending the knight, white can now start with e4, or he can start with queenside castling. e4 is more aggressive, and bishop e7, unpinning, and castles queenside. And this, I think, is the most interesting way to play against c5. And I remember studying how to beat the Trompowsky when I started playing knight e6, e6. And I decided to do this against c5, or I decided to play knight c3 against c5, because regardless of what black does, the worst case scenario, and this was my thinking, worst case scenario, he plays queen b6, I go for the Vaganian Gambit, which is unclear. Anything else, I believe white has an easier game to play. In the Vaganian Gambit as well, but black has a pawn. But here, this position, I don't see why anybody would want to play black rather than white. Fine, it's a Sicilian in which black is going to play for a queenside pawn storm or whatever, and I have to attack on the king side, but I've already castled, and I have a pleasant position. For example, after queen a5, which is the main move, f4. d6, Scheveningen, small center, knight f3, and these pieces are moving forward. h6 is the move here, but the pawn is still pinned, and e5, and the center just blows open. Knight takes e5, knight takes e5, queen takes e5, now bishop b5 check, for example. This is my analysis, now king f8, and who would want to be black here? So that's knight c3. I think knight c3 is should objectively give white the biggest chances. Okay, now finally, let's have a look at the best move. According to the engine, according to theory, the best move is bishop takes f6. Simply doubling the pawns. I should just say that e takes f6 is not the way to play this position. It doesn't give black enough chances, and g takes f6 is the theoretical move. I'll just give you a brief explanation of that. Knight c3, black plays d5, you play e3. Perfect position, no weaknesses for white. After, for example, knight c6, knight g2, you are going to play g3, bishop g2, put pressure on this pawn. Whoa, whoa, on this pawn. And eventually, black is going to have to defend with bishop e6, and it's just a passive position. Therefore, you play g takes, so that everything can be defended in your position, and you have this strong central pawn mass. Fine. Now, white should continue with d5. You don't want to break open your center. There are a couple of options. Queen b6 is again the most interesting move, forcing white to defend uncomfortably. You could play d6 or f5, but these two moves are going to be played later on, so queen b6 is the main move. And there's an interesting reason why queen b6 should be played first. I'm going to show you in a second. White plays queen c1. Fine. And now black usually continues with f5. He can also play bishop g7. That's a normal move. But there's an interesting line which I want to show you, which starts after bishop h6. And this line has been played by Daniel Dubov and other people. It's a very interesting line. So if I'm playing black here and I get this position, I would definitely play this move instead of f5. So f5 is the main move, but bishop h6 is very interesting. Of course, you don't want to take that bishop because queen b2 and your position collapses. This is similar to bishop f5 in the London when the queen is on c2, when queen takes f5 leads to queen b2. So in c5 positions in the London system. So in this position, e3 should be played, just blocking this bishop. And watch what happens. f5, c4, and f4. And now, since this c-pawn has moved, white was given a bit more options in the defense, meaning, most importantly, knight e2, knight c3, and the queen retreating back to d2. So watch what happens. E takes f4, bishop takes f4, now you can take. Queen takes f4. And after queen takes b2, you play knight e2. Okay, there's nothing for black but to take here. The difference is with this pawn gone, the queen can defend and prevent the black queen from entering the position via b2 once again. So, whoa. So queen takes rook, knight c3, d6, black finally starts developing, and queen to d2. And all of this has been played 8 times. White wins 43% of the games, but the queen is not trapped. I'll show you one game in which black managed to win, managed to get his queen out. So rook g8, g3. Okay, and now black can either play b5, Benko style, that's fine. b5 I think is the best move, and the engine says black is better after b5. But in this game, this was played against Alexei Alexandrov and Vladimir Zelnin in St. Petersburg in 1994. Black played a6, and watch what happens. Queen c2, attacking h7, king f8, not caring about h7, and queen b3. Apparently, queen c2 wasn't about attacking h7. Knight e7, bishop e2, b5, so that's black's idea, cb5, ab5. And now you can see that if the c3 knight moves, this rook is, or the queen is going to be able to take on e2. Then again, it's very hard not to move the knight, because the b pawn could advance to b4. Then again, black has given up the b5 pawn, so white should take it to prevent b4. So bishop takes. But now knight e5, and this is becoming scary. Even though the queen is sort of trapped, it's very hard to play white. Okay, bishop e2 played, c4 played, chasing the queen away. Queen b6, and now bishop to f5. And as you can see, all of black's pieces are coming to life. Look at this. And everything seems sort of perfect. Okay, so this is what happened. White castled, rook takes a2, giving up the exchange, knight takes, queen takes, and now the bishop is hanging, and the knight is hanging. So rook e1, okay, queen b3, queen d8 check, king g7, queen takes e7. This piece was taken, black simply defends, and from this position it's fairly easy to win. A piece up. So bishop g6, a6, rook e7, rook f8, queen c6, queen b2, and in this position white resigned. So this line with bishop h6 is very interesting. I mean, this requires a lot of research, I think, to learn all the plans which combine Benko stuff and the London system. So after e3, f5, c4, f4, takes, it's unbelievable that you can take, and I don't think anybody could figure this out over the board. So this is the sort of preparation top players have. This is the stuff you have to know. So if you play the Trompowsky, be prepared for bishop h6. Okay, however, f5 is the main move, and now we finally get to the thematic positions after c5, which you are going to be facing in most of your games with both colors, because most people are going to be playing the main line. So you play c4, bishop g7, knight c3, d6, e3, knight to d7, queen to c2, knight f6. And this is a normal setup, where after bishop d3, you can see what white has in this position. There's a ton of pressure on the f5 pawn, so that has to be defended. Therefore, you can see why. You can also see why we didn't take with the e pawn, because now the e file is closed, and black has the option to advance the pawn and attack the center. So e6 played, knight g2, e2 played, bishop to d7, castle. So now black can castle queen side, black can castle king side. Anything is possible, but basically what's important in this position is for white to keep the central tension, for black to keep the central tension, for black to try and drum up something on the queen side, for white to try and resist that and to try and punish black for his structural weakness. So if black castles king side, then I think e4 and breaking open the center is a good idea, just trying to attack. If black castles queen side, then of course a3, b4. White is always slightly better, more space, better pawn structure. However, black is not lost, and he has the bishop pair, and if the pieces get traded off, he should be worse, but if he manages to get some dynamic compensation, he is okay. For example, here is a game played between Krasimir Rusev and Valentin Iotov in the Bulgarian Championship in 2006, which black won. So black castled queenside. Rook AB1 was played. Of course, white is now going for a queenside attack. King B8, H3, which I don't think is necessary. I think this is a waste of time. I don't really understand the move. I think just A3 or even B4, giving up a pawn would have been better, but okay. Rook C8, Rook FD1. I don't understand this move either. I think, again, A3, B4 was more precise. However, I can understand reinforcing the center, putting pressure on D6. Not that it doesn't make sense, but given the circumstances, I think white should have pushed on sooner. H5, and now black starts his attack. Rook to D2. At this point, I just couldn't figure out what white is trying to do. Okay, and then he moves the rook away. So now it's apparent why black won. So white shouldn't waste time. Bishop H6 was played, and all of black's pieces are coming to life, and this is of course already winning for black. Alternatively, after Rook AB1 and King B8, if white had simply played A3 instead of H3 and Rook D1 and then Rook D2, I don't see how he can be any worse. I mean, black can start his attack, but white is starting his attack too. This is now very scary for black. So these positions after castle's queenside, as you can see from this game, are going to be risky for black. After castle's kingside, I don't think black has better chances. I just don't think black is going to lose that quickly. Okay, so let's sum this up. After c5, two main options for white. Either take on f6, go for a positional edge, or play d5 and or knight c3, going for either the Vaganian Gambit or a quick queenside castling and then attack. Okay, thank you for watching. Hope you got something from the video. Let me know what you think and stay tuned for more chess. Bye bye.